Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a massive behavioral mystery that honestly frustrates pretty much every leader, manager, and changemaker out there. We're unpacking the hidden psychology of workplace resistance and looking at exactly why your team might be fighting you tooth and nail, even when you're literally just trying to help them.
I want you to think back to a time when you rolled out something new to your team. Maybe it was a genuinely awesome new software tool, a faster process, or a policy update that was designed to make everyone's lives so much easier. On paper, it made perfect logical sense, right? But instead of relief or, a simple thank you, you were hit with this intense friction, endless complaints, or just absolute stubborn refusal to adapt. Why on earth does this happen? Why do people resist changes that objectively make their work better?
Well, this resistance usually takes a few very familiar shapes. You might see some sudden, quiet foot dragging on a new mandatory training. Or maybe there's a weird uptick in employees suddenly quoting old, outdated policies right back at you. Or my personal favorite, a massive spike in interest for the exact workaround management just banned. Now, as a leader, this looks exactly like laziness or just about attitude. But the reality? These classic workplace headaches are actually symptoms of a deeply ingrained, highly predictable psychological reflex. It's not about your team just deciding to be difficult. It's actually about a hidden trigger that we keep tripping over by accident. Okay, let's dive right into this. Section 1. The birth of reactance. To really get what's happening in your office today, we actually need to travel back to the 1960s to look at the academic roots of this.
The exact term we're looking for here is psychological reactance. It's defined as a motivational state or a pressure to regain a behavioral freedom when a choice is restricted or threatened. This concept was discovered by a psychologist named Jack Brehm back in 1966. Now, the really crucial word here is pressure. He didn't just find that people felt a little sad about losing an option. No, it was a literal pressure to fight back. It's a psychological compulsion to push toward that restricted choice, even if the person didn't actually care all that much about the choice to begin with. To see how this idea evolved, let's look at a quick timeline. Brehm started out in 1966 with these incredibly simple experiments. He'd give people a row of candy bars or a stack of records and just ask them to rank them. But then, he'd take one option completely off the table, or even just threaten to take it away. And guess what? Instantly, that restricted option shot straight to the top of the rankings. People wanted the candy bar more simply because they couldn't have it anymore. Then in 1981, Brehm and his wife Sharon expanded this to identify vicarious reactance. This was the wild discovery that you don't even have to lose a freedom yourself. Just watching someone else lose it triggers that exact same reflex. From there, consumer marketers started using it to sell scarce products. Health communicators used it to figure out why overly bossy public health ads were backfiring. And finally, by the 2000s and 2010s, organizational researchers realized, wow, this explains exactly what's happening in our workplaces.
And that brings us to Section 2, Reactance in the Workplace. Let's pull this narrative out of the laboratory and drop it straight into the modern office.
So, what happens when leaders accidentally trigger this candy bar reflex in their teams? Well, a 2013 paper in the Journal of Organizational Change Management laid this out beautifully. Think about it. Organizational change, almost by definition, restricts what employees are used to being free to do. A new software rolls out and it kills a familiar workflow. A new policy narrows down a choice that used to belong entirely to the employee. What the researchers argued is that the resistance you're seeing actually has very little to do with the final destination you're trying to take your team to. It is almost entirely about how the change is imposed. If you threaten their autonomy, boom, the reactance reflex kicks in automatically.
And this brings us to what is honestly a massive aha moment for so many managers: vicarious reactance at work. Imagine you publicly reprimand just one single employee for missing a step in some newly mandated process. You might think you're just correcting one person, right? Wrong. It doesn't just affect them. It acts as an invisible contagion. Everyone watching absorbs a small dose of that exact same threat to their own autonomy. So a very public example that was meant to enforce compliance actually quietly infects the entire team and generates this widespread, silent resistance.
This dynamic perfectly sets up Section 3, the surveillance backfire. It's a highly relatable, modern test case for reactance, specifically looking at electronic monitoring.
What is genuinely fascinating about this is how the exact same piece of tracking software produces completely opposite behaviors, depending entirely on the frame leaders put around it. Recent studies took a hard look at productivity tracking software. When the monitoring was framed as developmental, meaning it was meant to help the employee improve and grow, it barely triggered any resistance. In fact, sometimes it actually increased proactive behavior, which is crazy. But when that exact same software was framed as preventive, like it was just there to catch people making mistakes or breaking the rules, it consistently backfired. Employees became way less proactive and deeply resistant. So the tool wasn't the problem at all, the framing was the variable.
This perfectly aligns with self-determination theory, which was developed by Edward Deci and Richard Ryan. They identified that autonomy isn't just a nice-to-have, it's a basic, fundamental psychological need. So whether you're dealing with a strict corporate mandate, a health warning, or a shiny new tracking dashboard, if you override someone's sense of autonomy, you might get surface-level compliance just because you're the boss, but underneath that, you are producing deep, systemic disengagement. Feeling controlled inherently destroys performance every single time.
So how do we actually fix this? Let's move right into Section 4, Strategies to Reduce Friction, where we'll look at some actionable ways to patch this psychological bug in our leadership. All right, here is your 3-step playbook, and this is directly derived from decades of hard research. Step 1, explain the context before the rollout. A mandate that arrives with solid context reads very, very differently than some top-down, unquestionable order from on high. Step 2, build real choice inside the boundary. If a new tool is absolutely strictly required, let the team choose how they structure their daily workflow around it. Give them at least a little bit of their autonomy back. And step 3, exactly like we just saw with the surveillance data, frame the change as developmental, not punitive. To see this working in the real world, the IMD Business School documented how major organizations like Best Buy and Roboco successfully navigated all of this. Instead of just blasting out announcements about massive changes, they shifted to actually co-creating those changes with the employees who would have to live with them day to day. By turning a unilateral, one-way announcement into a genuine, collaborative decision-making process, they drastically reduced friction. Essentially, they gave their teams a choice inside the boundary. Now, before you run off and start diagnosing your entire team with psychological reactance, I do have to throw in a quick warning here. Not every piece of pushback is a psychological reflex. Sometimes your team resists a change because, honestly, the change is genuinely just a bad idea. We absolutely cannot use 60 years of complex psychological theory to excuse terrible business decisions, right? The real value of this research isn't to shield your ideas from valid criticism, but to explain why even your most brilliant, well-intentioned ideas can totally blow up if you deliver them the wrong way. So, the crucial point is this. The ultimate golden rule we can extract from all this data comes down to one idea. People given a choice inside a boundary tend to accept the boundary. People handed only the boundary tend to fight it. This is the exact same mechanism Jack Brehm found with those candy bars way back in 1966. If you just hand people a massive wall, they are going to try to climb it, even over something they never really cared about in the first place. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative question to take back to your desk today. Think about a boundary, a rule, or a process that you recently set with your team. Be completely honest with yourself. Did you just hand them the boundary, or did you manage to give them a choice inside it? How you answer that question might just completely explain the resistance you're facing right now. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this helps you navigate your next big change with a whole lot less friction.